podcast with me, Judy Curtis, the lovely David Curtis, who is the site of our soiree here, and Lorwyn Connie Nagel, who's going to provide us with some insight, which leaves me to provide the ampersand in the middle and try and keep the whole thing together. And so, without further ado, let's get right on with our question. Okay, and this week's topic is nature's magnetism. So, I was trying to think of what we could say for this. I mean, magnetism, attraction. Are we attracted by the colours in nature or the topography or what? I came across a quote by Aristotle, that well-known painter, and he said, "In all things of nature there is something of the marvellous." And so I guess for a painter, that's what we're always looking for, is something marvellous to recreate on canvas. So Dave, let's come over to you straight away. You've been painting for many years now. Are you still inspired by nature, going out and painting on location? Do you ever get jaded from that?
No, nature is never, it's always something new and fresh. Even if I went out every day for a week, the same, say it's summertime, went out every day, I would, find different things. I think the magnetism is the important thing because it is very strong and compelling. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're bringing in magnetism, I mean, you're bringing in the idea of gravity. I think you're bringing the idea of natural strength. Maybe magnetism is something that's there, but we don't see those forces. I think that's an important part. We're lucky today as painters to have a lot of scientific proofs about nature. One of the major ones, I think, is the understanding of fractals and the proving that there is such a thing as an infinite shape, which every artist should be drawn to. There's a nice little movie about fractals in which they sort of indulge the artistic side of this, because we are talking about something that's visual. And it was amazing how they brought up the ancient artists 2,000-3,000 years ago, finding certain shapes and seeing things that they felt were naturalistic. The Paisley print, things like that, which resemble what the modern day scientists have seen as the infinite shape. So artists, I think, subconsciously were very aware of the fact that there was something within nature to hold it all together, a bigger force. And I think that's sort of like an explanation of what the magnetism is. For a personal point of view, I got started, I was trained in the studio, so I thought I'd be a still life painter. I liked interiors better than portraits. I wanted to do interiors and still lifes, and I realized I really didn't have an imagination for those things, and I really needed something, active. I mean, I could read a good book and my imagination would go wild, but I couldn't find any images that would come true. So after many years, 2 or 3 years of trying to come up with still lifes and things, I said, maybe I'm a landscape painter. So I moved from Boston to Gloucester, went home, and started painting landscapes. And I realized after many years that the reason why I was attracted to landscapes was because I didn't have any preconceived ideas about it. I didn't know what a tree was. A tree was marvelous. Mm-hmm. A tree was a miracle. I looked at it like, holy cow, how could that happen? And not everybody sees it that way. And as I didn't see how to do a beautiful vase with something sitting next to it or something, making an interesting still life. My still lifes were always the teapot, the teaspoon, the teacup. Absolutely boring, telling a story. So what? It's not gonna make another painting. It's not, the idea couldn't go any farther. But as soon as I started painting trees or skies or parts of nature, I realized that it was endless, and I didn't understand it. And to this day, after painting it for 50 years, I still don't. I'm hoping today when we go out to paint that I might get a little closer to understanding it. You know, I look at a bird and he's looking back at me. What's he thinking? What's he doing? You know, those are the kind of, and that never happened to me in the studio. Out of doors, it did.
Yeah.
So I was going to say too that there's a lot of energy when we go outdoors, and the magnetism, the fascination, the appeal of being in nature may be that there's an energetic force that happens, and I know it certainly happens for me. When I began painting outdoors, I felt like I was having a relationship with the scene that I was painting.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was talking to me, maybe through the movement of the wind in the trees. But there were so many varieties of forces that are natural forces that were almost speaking to me in a different language, but in a language. Nevertheless, it was a very prominent language to me. The movement of the light and the shadows and all that. So I think that when we talk about nature's magnetism, there is a feeling of magic, of the mysterious, the sublime, and sort of even of the sacred. You know, in certain situations, and I think that happened with many of the great artists. When we think about some of these fantastic Frederick Church, you know, an American artist who painted these huge vistas, and you got the enormity of the American continent, you know, through looking at his paintings, and I think that's nature's magnetism.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Just think if you'd never seen sort of the Middle West or the Far West, you know, to see a painting by Church, you'd suddenly think, how can that possibly be attached to the bit where I am? I mean, it's just so immense. America's such a huge country, you know, and you come from a little country like Great Britain, and you suddenly come out to America. There's so many different kinds of terrain, and just it's overwhelming almost. So as artists, when you go out, can nature overwhelm you? I know you want to be, you know, we're all part of nature. You know, man is an animal too, as they say. So when you go out there, you need to, you know, perhaps invest yourself in what you're doing, and you're not just out there to paint a pictorial picture of nature. You want to paint something about how you feel about the scene in front of you.
Yeah, I think if you went out and just did you know, I hate to use the word chocolate box cover. There's nothing wrong with the chocolates, but it seems to be that, you know, it's a sort of a. I don't like to put it down because it is just what it is, but it's an advertisement of a, you know, pleasant experience if you eat one of their chocolates. You know, hopefully they're good on the inside. But my sister always used to test to see if they were soft by jamming her finger in the bottom of the chocolate, and if it was a hard center, she'd put it back in the box. And I think I was the numb one who couldn't figure out why are these holes in the bottom of the chocolate. Anyway, enough of the chocolate.
However, we digress.
I'm sorry. Yeah, well, what Connie brought up was the I think the bigness, the macrocosm, and I was talking about the microcosm, and I think just taking it from our points of view. How we saw two different things, the enormity of nature, yet I'm seeing the finiteness of nature, you know, the small little energies that constantly are repetitious over and over again, but never repeats the same thing. I think, I mean, how many times, Judy, have you made cuttings of roses, planted them in the ground? It doesn't come out the same rose as the other rose.
No,
it might have. They're always different. Even the colors and slightly, even though it's the same, it's like it's new again.
It's taking on its own life.
And I think that newness that nature offers you. I think I keep on quoting Harold Speed today, but I think Speed mentions that he had a commission to do an avenue of trees leading up to somebody's home in Britain. A beautiful home, avenue of trees. And he said, when I sat down, I just started making things up. And I realized my imagination wasn't as good as if I went out and found trees in nature. Because we formulate this idea that a tree has to look a certain way. I had a young student the other day, and I found that they were putting the tree down, that not what they saw, but what they was inside them.
What they
Yeah.
think a tree looks
Right.
like, yeah.
And I think what we're trying to say is you got to invite that thing, the inside feeling of your own tree, but you also have to draw it in from nature. And if I asked somebody the other day, they wanted to go out and paint and take a lesson, and I just said, well, do you like outdoors? Do you like the outdoors? And they looked at me, well, what kind of a question is that? Well, I think that's an important part of being a plein air painter, is you have to like to go outdoors and just sit with nature for a while. And it's truly amazing. And the transformations that happen to you, and the education. When I started off as a landscape painter, I don't think I knew what a bird, the difference between one sparrow and another sparrow, or what was this kind of bird. And after seeing birds in front of me all the time, I went out and bought a bird book to learn more about birds. Now I'm at the stage where if I hear a bird song, I know what it is. And plants the same way. This year there were mushrooms everywhere, all over the ground. I think everybody who's listening will say, "Well, we had a lot of mushrooms too," but here in New England, there were mushrooms. I've never seen so many mushrooms.
Yeah.
Maybe just the result of things. But so it's amazing what nature will produce.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about nature's magnetism, so magnetism leads me to remember something they used to try and drum into me at school, which was that opposites attract. So when you look in nature, I'm just looking out of the window here, and I can see, yes, there's the green grass, there's sunlight coming across it, there's a tree which I think is a Yankeanthus or something, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And to me, it has quite a reddish tone to it. So when you're looking at opposites attract, do you see colours in nature? Are you attracted to a scene as painters because of the colours that are out there? And do we always find opposites in nature?
I think we do find opposites in nature constantly. I mean, whether it be complements, red and green coming together, like in the fall, or our darks and lights. But I think that there's a continuation of opposites, and that maybe that is part of the synergy and the alchemy. Let's put the word alchemy in, because I think that alchemy is part of what the painter is involved in, and they are coming up with something. The old days they talked about it being, bringing metals and base metals and all these things coming together to create the Philosopher's Stone. Well, that was something that was coming out of these elements, but it was bigger than the elements. And I think in painting we're doing that same thing, where we've got our paint brushes and we're talking about brush strokes and color notes and design elements and all these things, but they in the end come up with something that is sort of a force of nature, and it becomes something like the Philosopher's Stone that is bigger than the elements, the base elements that produced it.
Yeah. It is, when you look at nature, you think, should I go out and paint today? Let's check what the weather is. And the meteorologist comes on and gives a little spiel. If we listen to them, half the time you'd never go out of doors to paint because, the weather's not going to be good, windy, rainy. And yet, because I was brought up in England and it was always supposed to rain, you'd go out and do what you planned to do anyway. And you'd often have a great day and the weather was completely different, because nature will always do what nature wants.
Yeah.
And so I think we should always take that chance to get out there and see what's going on.
I think that plein air painters who really get the bug of plein air painting do go out and kind of battle the elements or the
Yeah.
forces of nature, you know, and they'll be out there in the middle of winter and the hot summers and all of that kind of stuff, and drizzly rain, you know,
Okay.
because they hear that maybe the sun is going to come out in the afternoon,
Yeah.
you know, things like
Yeah,
that.
so you have to be driven to want to do that. I mean, you were talking about them going out in all elements. It reminded me of Aldro Hibbard, who would go out into these. I mean, where would you go? You leave Rockport in the middle of a New England winter and you go north. I mean, what kind of person does that? And I think he was so driven to prove he was a man and not a poet with a brush. He had to show that he could get out there and really battle.
But you've
nature.
always, in your biography on Eldor Hibbert, which is a very fine book, I think you brought out his deep affection for nature.
Oh yeah, I think so. That's what Elaine, his daughter, always said, that he wasn't a religious man in the normal sense, but nature was sort of the religion. He would go out there and he would commune with nature, and he was so comfortable with it, he could, you know, go out in these terrible conditions and paint and get something. And I know he didn't like to admit that he had these kind of feelings, you know, because obviously you've got to have some sensitivity as an artist to be able to paint, you know, the kind of paintings that Hibbard came up with. But he could never admit that, I don't think, because he came from a generation where, you know, to have feelings as a man, you were a sissy. So he had to go out there and prove his virility by going out in terrible conditions. And he really did put up with terrible things. I mean, his daughter remembered him coming through the doorway one time when he'd been out painting and shouting, "Whiskey!" you know, stumbling towards the fire, and he'd been out all day painting. You know, he'd get a lift out with the logging teams in the morning, and he'd have to be ready when they came back because they weren't going to wait for him to pack up. So he had to, you know, really plan his day.
Push it.
But you know, and then he wants to paint a stream. So he goes out one day to do it, and the following day he goes out and the stream's frozen over. So he has to start breaking through the ice to get the effect he wants. I mean, these days, would artists really go through what he did years ago? I mean, there's no difference really in the kind of painting he did, although probably not as many opportunities to paint that subject matter anymore, because man has, you know.
Well, the tree
built places
nature
all
has
over
taken
nature.
over. Yeah, I was up in Woodstock and doing a workshop, and I was reminiscing that Metcalf, a great American landscape painter, had painted all over these hills up there and where we were. And it's a shame we can't see the contour of the hills now because there's too many trees. And B&B, they threw me off the table. I didn't want. You want to cut down the trees? Well, maybe a dewy meadow can be just as benevolent to the earth as a forest of trees. I don't know. I mean, all I'm saying is that sometimes nature. I know we try to
Nature
come
abhors a vacuum.
right, and we don't know much about it. We really don't. And I think artists being intuitive and being in touch with trying to capture a moment or capture an effect. Maybe we're like those Indian artists back in 3,000 BC that were finding that nature seemed to be represented by this design of paisley or something like a paisley print. And Art Nouveau sort of illustrates this idea of movement and life joined together in this stillness that we see as nature. It's absolutely beautiful.
Well, yes, stillness, but I also see a lot of rhythm in nature.
Exactly.
Which
Right.
is, you know, so when you're going out to paint, you're looking for that gestural, the line of design. You know, do you look for the line of design first, or do you find the scene you want and then look for the line of design within that particular scene?
I think the methodology of the sight and insight method is the line of design can come first. I tend to find when I'm painting, I tend to do my spotting first, my color spots, and then see if it does make a line. And it usually always does through the color spots. But I was well schooled, and I find the more and more I've been teaching, it's interesting. My father would always drill in at the supper table. You know, I was about 4 or 5 years old. 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And I guess that was his lottery numbers. No, what it means is the odd numbers are more rhythmic
Yeah.
than even numbers.
Yeah.
If you watch a tennis match, there's two people there.
Yeah.
You know, if there was a third person and a third configuration of a net, we'd go bump, bump, bump. We'd move in a musical way. Rhythm is that negative space is very important in music, and the positive spaces are also equally as important. But a lot of people are just seeing the two positive things, and they forget all about the third part, the elemental part. So he always believed that good design, or to get movement in a painting, is these odd numbers, ones and threes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, once again, we've come to the end of our time, can you believe? So we're going to bid you a fond farewell, and we hope you'll join us next week when we'll be gathered around the coffee table and discussing yet another interesting piece of art. So until then, thank you very much and have a great week.